In today's video, Shankari Chandran's last novel won the Miles Franklin Award. What will her new novel Safe Haven do? A backlist Elif Shafak book that got banned. A Japanese novel about dessert and leprosy. When is it grief and when is it mental illness? A South Sudanese tale of death and marriage, a dystopian feminist art novel, 200 million years of the evolution of the female body, a tale of Palestinian diasporic identity, the hottest debut novel out of India right now, and the follow-up to The Girl with the Louding Voice. Hello, welcome to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. My name is Scott. If you're new here, this is a channel where I review books, if you didn't figure that out from the introduction. Specifically new releases, literary fiction and global literature. This is a series where I review all the books I've read recently, and it serves as a reminder to myself that I read much quicker than I make videos. Seriously, I should just call this video Reads and drop the word recent from it. I'm going from books I enjoyed the least to books I enjoyed the most. But I don't like to rank non-fiction. While there can be good or bad non-fiction books, I find especially when we're talking about science books that are presenting facts, the most important thing is how interested you are in that topic. You know, because the enjoyment of fiction isn't the slightest bit subjective at all. Regardless of my flawed argument, I'm going to start by telling you about Eve by Cat Bohannon, which I did very much enjoy. The book has the subtitle, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution. I find evolution, particularly human evolution, to be a fascinating topic, and Bohannon is discussing that through the lens of feminism. When it comes down to it, the number of differences between those of us born into the male sex and the female sex are really remarkably small for humans, and with the exception of childbirth, I cannot think of a single activity where a skilled person would not be better than an average person of the opposite sex. Nonetheless, women on average live longer, they're more likely to get Alzheimer's, they experience heart attacks in a very different way. Why do we have these differences? Where do they come from? Do they have an evolutionary root? Some of these differences we know about and account for in life, but most modern medicine, for example, sees no difference between testing 100 men or 100 women, and consequently, being a woman is not a normal experience when it comes to drugs and treatments. The details around this are equal parts fascinating and horrific. A different chapter completely looks at our closest relatives, the socially male-dominated chimps and the socially female-dominated bonobos, looking at how their societies differ because of this, how the roles of women change, and comparing that to our society. We are a male-dominated society, but we don't actually know why, and what I found very interesting is that Bohannon asks if we have always been a male-dominated society, and could it have flipped at various points in our evolution? And I love these very complex archaeological arguments that look at what we would expect to see if that was represented or contradicted in the archaeology, which ultimately doesn't have a lot of information for us to go on, but can still produce scientific evidence. I've seen a bit of criticism of this book for being too academic in tone, and I think that that is very poor criticism. It may be on the more academic side of non-fiction, and Bohannon does expect you to keep up, but there is nothing particularly challenging in her presentation. She does, however, include a few things which I was a little bit surprised at, and shifted the narrative away from the accepted science into debated theories. And she did that without letting the reader know that that's what she was doing. And I really do hate this in science books. And it's made even more confusing by the fact that she lets the readers know at other points that what she is about to say is controversial. Look, I love debated theories and well-constructed arguments, and I do understand that people want facts, and that can sometimes be a little bit hard, especially in archaeology where there's a lot of dispute. But I think you need to trust your readers. I think you need to trust them to interpret your arguments, to interpret the doubt and uncertainty around them, and that's just part of science. I don't believe readers should be shielded from it for the point of making an argument stronger. Overall, however, this book is amazing fact after amazing fact. If you read this, and despite the criticism I just had of it, I really do recommend it. You will need to have somebody around who is also interested in this stuff, so you can just say, did you know that? This book is truly amazing, and it captures both our sense of wonder and amazement at the natural world and the history of humanity. And it makes us angry at the current political situation and how women are mistreated or just not considered. This book is amazing in that it captures both our sense of wonder and amazement at the natural world and the history of humanity, but it also makes us angry at the current political situation and how women are mistreated and ill-considered. And these are two very different emotions, and I don't think that many books have ever captured both. Wet nursing played a massive impact on population growth in the first city-states. Midwifery predates the species Homo sapien. Testicular size is proportional to how monogamous a species is. Human testes are too small for us to be sleeping around with everybody, but too large for us to be truly monogamous. Buttock and thigh fat, and not just breast fat, is critical for both fetal and infant development. The Fat Lady Sings by Jacqueline Roy. After winning her Booker Prize and becoming very famous overnight, Bernardine Evaristo used her fame in a number of very positive ways, and one was to republish a collection of novels by Black British authors that she loved, which were no longer in print. And this is one of those books. Gloria has been locked up in a psychiatric unit because she sings in public, and that has brought the attention of the police. We learn that Gloria is grieving her dead partner Josie, and this grief has really taken over her life. Gloria is loud, she is not afraid to be herself, she is fat, and her narrative is alternated with Merle, who is anorexic, quiet, ashamed of who she is. Physically, they're the opposite. Personality-wise, they're also the opposite. One is almost too comfortable in their own skin, and the other is not at all comfortable. Gloria's sections are mostly about her relationship with Josie, and Josie sounds like a wonderful partner. Gloria is brash, but Josie calms her down, balances her, if you like. They're the perfect yin and yang. This novel is full of insightful and almost humorous commentary, such as, "I was disturbing the peace. What peace?" I said. "This world is not a peaceful place. This is the time of doom and gloom and all kind of disaster." It is asking a lot of questions around the treatment of mentally ill people and a desire for conformity. When does grief become depression? When do people need help, and how do we judge that? I cannot help but to look at Josie and Gloria and how people accept them and other people as well. You can see the pressures for them to find husbands, to marry men. Neither lesbians nor the mentally ill conform to society's ideals of normal. Although I'm glad to say that since this book was written in the year 2000, we've improved in both aspects, even if we still have further to go than we have travelled already, even if it's a case of 2 steps forward, 1 3/4 steps backwards. While I enjoyed this book, it has some interesting points and some cool characters. Everything's done well, nothing's done particularly poorly, but it's just a bit forgettable. It really has mushed into the other books that I've read recently. Songs for the Dead and the Living by Sara M. Saleh. This is a coming-of-age novel that looks at a family, cultural identity, and migration. Jamila is the 9-year-old daughter of a Palestinian refugee and a Lebanese man who calls Beirut home. This coming-of-age novel starts with her gradual realization that her family are not quite themselves in Lebanon and are trying both to blend in and to fight to retain their Palestinian identities. As conflict comes to Beirut, they flee to Cairo, a further step away from Palestine and further away from their original identities, but they're still in the Arab world. However, the family finally migrate to Australia. With each move, the culture they belong to is becoming more distant and their identity more important. Set between the years 1977 and 1987, while this novel is primarily about Jamila and her family, issues such as gender equality, the education of women, and domestic violence, as well as sectarian division, are all also touched upon. As the youngest of 4 daughters, Jamila's family begins to change as she ages. An older sister is married, a cousin is orphaned and comes to live with them. Every time they move, they leave a piece of themselves behind. Sometimes it's the boy Jamila has become close to in Lebanon, the sister who has gotten married, and sometimes it's more symbolic pieces. Quite a lot of the friction in this novel comes down to the different identities within the family. By the time Jamila is an adult, she has been influenced by 4 different countries. What even is her identity? Where does she call home? Will she move back to Beirut or Palestine or Cairo or somewhere else in the Arab world? Or will she settle in Australia and will that be her forever home? What this book does very well is capture the diasporic and fragmented nature of the Palestinian people. Today there are people in the world that say that Palestinian is not a race. They're something else. They're Lebanese or Arab. It is, of course, far-right Zionist propaganda set on the erasure of an identity of people, but it is working. After all, the area of Palestine has, over its history, been part of 24 different recorded countries, empires, republics, dynasties, or caliphates, from the Canaanites to the Ottomans, and nobody is claiming to be any of those identities today. How long before Palestine is a historical race of note? This book is full of nice prose, but there's nothing about it to lift it into the exceptional category. It was good. I was glad I read it, but that's kind of all it was. Landscapes by Christine Lai. Set in the not too distant future, when the climate has really begun to shift and our political world has begun to collapse, Penelope is archiving what remains of her estate's once notable art collection. Penelope and her husband Aidan has sold their estate out of necessity, but Aidan's brother Julian wants to return to have one last look at the estate where he grew up and spent his childhood before it is sold. 22 years earlier, Penelope was in a brief but violent relationship with Julian and is concerned about his return. This is a really ambitious book. There are little nuggets all throughout this book that give the readers pause to consider the meaning behind the symbolism or the allegory. For example, Julian at one point mentions that the estate was built from the profits of the sugar industry, and you're pondering, does it represent industrialization, the slave trade, or the exploration of tropical third world resources for the profits of the global north? The world is collapsing in a very realistic way. Is it symbolic? But it's not like the structures that exist now are no longer there. It's that everything is degraded. The division between class is expanded. It is almost medieval, but with trains, planes, and phones. This book, however, I think is centrally about the depiction of rape and pleasure in art and the impact that that has upon society. A lot of art is depicting myths and stories told thousands of years before they're painted, and they're putting a personal spin on things. Often those stories have been translated before the artist has even read them, and when we analyse anything in art, there are a lot of layers. But rape is so often depicted as sexual, almost as a taboo pleasure, and this book is very good at demonstrating how that's not a modern phenomenon. There is an alarming number of men who don't understand consent, and that is not a new thing, and I have to wonder, it is only the successful art that we discussed now. There's a lot of art that has been lost completely, but sex sells. And are the artists in question depicting rape as pleasurable because they don't understand the difference, or because it makes them money? And does that even matter? Lai is naming art pieces as the novel progresses, and this really is a book for art nerds. I love that we have Julian and Aidan in this book, two very different men. A man who doesn't understand consent and who mistreats Penelope and who honestly just doesn't get it. And the man who understands all these things. The exploration of Julian and Penelope's relationship is very relevant to the art as part of this conversation. And so too is the conversations that Aidan and Julian have. Does Aidan do enough to correct Julian's poor ideas, especially when they're not having an overt conversation about things? I have to wonder in this book though, what does this very important topic have to do with a dystopian future where society is crumbling? We have a feminist art novel discussing rape, consent, sexuality, power. That's a lot. We do need a setting. Every book needs a setting, but this setting confuses me. I quite like the setting. I feel like it's a novel in itself and a novel that I want to read. I just don't see what that novel has to do with this novel about art and consent. It doesn't quite work in that aspect. Still, overall, there's a lot of good stuff in this book. And I've not mentioned it yet, but the prose is mwah. A Mouthful of Salt by Reem Gaafar. Part 1, 1980 Sudan, and a village is hit with a flood. A party is on the lookout for a boy, and a body is found. Part 2, 30 years earlier. A woman flees from the south, where they have dark skin, and runs off with a man from the north, where they're Arabs. Neither family are happy with this match, and it is sadly a metaphor for Sudan and South Sudan. Set in the shadows of the British occupation coming to an end, we can see what division eventually led to these countries separating in 2011 in this novel. At one point, his family refers to her as a slave. The couple have a child, of which the mother is responsible for everything. She needs to work to look after him. The father increasingly works out of town at a family business for months at a time, erratically sending home large chunks of money, returning for months and then leaving again until one day he doesn't return at all. Part 3 is the conclusion, where we learn what links parts 1 and 2. This is one of those books that is really blending the literary with the commercial. The plot is compelling, but it is also an allegorical novel. The division between the northern and southern people really comes through. Racial inequality, gender inequality, being a single mother, identity, father-son relationships, inheritance, family and money are all important themes in this novel. Where this novel lets itself down, however, is I found part 1 pretty confusing. Parts 2 and 3 have much better focus, much better clarity, and are really just a fantastic novel. Maybe part of this is me figuring out what the author was doing and getting interested in the story and characters, but definitely this is a book that really improves the further into it you go. Sweet Bean Paste by Durian, Sukegawa, translated from Japanese by Allison Watt. Sentaro runs a dorayaki shop, which is a kind of pancake stuffed with sweet bean paste. He has a criminal record and is a bit of a failure, counting down the days until he can repay his debt and be free from the shop. One day, Toku, an elderly lady with disfigured hands and a passion for baking, walks into his shop and asks for a job, which she is granted after convincing him to try her sweet bean paste. Toku quickly begins to teach Sentaro the art of sweet bean paste making, and the two form an unlikely friendship as Sentaro slowly develops an appreciation for making the dessert. This almost saccharine description doesn't really do this book justice, because this book is about the stigma and the prejudice Toku faces, and the friendship she makes having recovered from Hansen's disease. better known as leprosy. Tuku lives in a part of the city for survivors of leprosy. She is not contagious. She faces challenges such as her deformed hands. This is an illness now thankfully almost entirely eradicated, and something I don't know a lot about. Sentaro himself is othered from society for being a criminal. Wakana, who is a teenaged girl and a regular of the shop who forms a friendship with both of the characters, is troubled. She is forced to drop out of full-time school and only go part-time due to poverty. Sentaro and Toku regularly give her the dessert for nothing. Wakana doesn't know who her father is and was raised by her single mother. All three characters are othered in different ways by society, but despite their differences in age, despite their varied past, the three characters accept each other for who they are, and they become unlikely friends. This novel is horrible and extremely sad in places, but it is also lovely and uplifting in other places. It really hits a great balance between this kind of prejudice these groups face in Japan and what it could be like if everybody was nice. And I would never consider this a miserable novel, but also I think so many people will cry reading this. It is life, and life has a lot of varied emotions in it. This is a novel that is kind of marketed as a sweet, nice, pick-me-up novel about sweet bean paste and pancakes, and that is a complete disservice to what it is. It is a novel that has so much more depth than it appears on the surface. It's a surprisingly complex read, and there are lots of themes I've neglected to mention in this review too. A wonderful novel with so many different emotional experiences. This is the first of two book club novels I'm going to talk about that I read with my Patreon in this wrap-up. The second being the next book I'm about to review. So I think in between talking about those books, it's a perfect time to thank all my wonderful Patreons for their support and remind people that you can join up to and join our live chats about all the different books we discuss and support this channel. The Bastard of Istanbul by Elif Shafak. Banned in Turkey, Shafak wrote it in both English and Turkey, and she was facing jail time for writing it. The case was dismissed a few months later, but it did spark a freedom of information discussion, and as far as I know, it is no longer banned, but this is not the only book of Shafak's that have upset the Turkish officials and landed her in hot water. Set in America, Istanbul and Armenia, the Kanziki family contains 4 sisters, a grandmother and a bastard daughter, Asia, who all live together in Istanbul. Their brother lives in America with his wife and their Armenian daughter, Armanush, who flies to Istanbul without her parents' knowledge, staying with her family and becoming fast friends with Asia, as both women are 19 years old. Armanush is fiercely Armenian and is essentially spying on Turkey in her mind. This novel delves into the past between Armenia and Turkey, the massacre of the Armenians, and the ignorance towards those events in Turkey due to government repression of information and the stereotypes that follow from that. It doesn't matter what we do, those Armenians are never happy. It's almost funny. Asia is into philosophy and meets her friends at Cafe Kandara, a reference to the Czech author of the same name. This novel is littered with all kinds of references and discussions of philosophy and allows Shafak to explore so many issues and challenges facing Armanush. With her parents uninformed of her whereabouts, Armanush is soon discovered, leading to a family reunion and an unveiling of a dark family secret. While I enjoyed the exploration of the animosity between Armenians and Turks, there were several elements of this book that didn't quite work, not least the ending, which I didn't find truly believable. This was only Shafak's second novel in English, and since this she has matured into a very well-rounded and talented author, And that talent is clearly visible in this novel, in her prose, in her character development particularly. But also, you can see the difference experience has made. You can see how she has sanded the edges of her talent to make it smoother. I think of Elif Shafak as a safe author who always produces excellent work. But the fact is, yes, she is an author of immense quality, but actually some books she writes really speak to me so much more than others. And while this was a good book, in my next recent reads, I will be discussing Elif Shafak's new novel, There Are Rivers in the Sky, which I think is much better than this backlist novel of hers. So make sure you're subscribed for that review. I have 3 books to go. They are all exceptional. It's been good books today, but these 3 are a real step up, and not a little step up, but a big step up. But I've already discussed one of them in a standalone video, so I'm going to discuss it earlier in this video than I would otherwise. I've read 199 books this year at the time of filming, and this is comfortably sitting in my top 5. And So I Roar by Abi Dare. The sequel to Dare's first novel, The Girl with the Louding Voice, with the opening scenes set moments after that novel ends. And I'm going to give you a really lazy yet very accurate review. If you liked, loved, hated, or were meh about The Girl with the Louding Voice, you will feel exactly the same about And So I Roar. For those of you unfamiliar with The Girl with the Louding Voice, it follows Adani, who wants nothing more than to be educated, but faces challenge after challenge, eventually meeting Miss Tia, a wealthy lady whom she forms a friendship with. Tia and Adani are central to this novel again. However, we do get a lot more of Tia. They are both the protagonists of this one, 50-50 split. When we discuss the themes that this book brings up, this series is centering a 14-year-old girl who wants to be educated, and there's some clear themes. It's obviously feminist. It is challenging the traditional narrative of Nigeria, their patriarchy. It is looking at power and the importance of education. And we also have themes around being a mother, childbirth, stillbirth, abortion, rape, and IVF. It's an incredibly feminist book. Adani is also from the country, or from a village, and she has to go to Lagos to try and win her education. So there is this real Nigerian city versus country divide. And if you thought that was a big thing where you live, it is so much bigger in Nigeria. The education level of the villagers is poor. They have these beliefs that Adani and Tia can just explain. This is climate change. This is oil companies. This is how it works. And the environment and climate change is a very important theme to this book, as too is female genital mutilation. And again, this is about education versus superstition and outdated beliefs and practices. To go with the feminist themes and the city versus country divide, we also have the theme of money, power, class, and corruption. It is a Nigerian novel. How can there not be corruption as a theme? And again, all of this links in with education. And we see this no clearer than Tia, who has money, and how she is treated versus Adani, who does not have money. Plot-wise, Adani and Tia suck you in so much. You root for both of them so easily, and it's hard to tell if it is the plot that is fantastic or the characters. The answer, by the way, is both, but it is one of those novels where the strength of one aspect complements the other and makes that aspect even better. And to that point, the setting is so suffocating. It really adds to the tension of the plot and makes you feel what these characters were up against. Lastly, I love the way the title of these 2 books speak to each other. If the first book was about Adani finding her louding voice, what is she going to do in the second book? She is about to roar. Safe Haven by Shankari Chandran. And this is a follow-up to her Miles Franklin award-winning novel Chai Time at Cinnamon Garden. Safe Haven is an all-round fantastic novel, but one of the aims of Shankari is to generate conversation about a very real political issue in Australia, one that is increasingly irrelevant around the world. And while I don't usually shy away from political commentary when it is relevant to a book review, today I'm going to include an extra large portion of it, and it may not be popular with some viewers. Port Camden Detention Centre is a remote island output, and the setting for this novel, it is where asylum seekers are sent as they await processing, and it is a very thinly veiled allegory for Manus Island. An officer dies in suspicious circumstances, and Lucky, a special investigator, is sent to do, as her job title suggests, investigate. Fina is a Sri Lankan nun who arrived in Australia as an asylum seeker, and she speaks to the media about the conditions inside the detention centre and is threatened with deportation. Australia, we protect our whistleblowers. When we think of books that critique Australia's treatment of asylum seekers, it is hard not to immediately think of No Friend But the Mountain by Behrouz Boochani, which is a book I think everybody should read, Aussie or no. It is absolutely fantastic. So with this novel, Shankari Chandran faces the challenge of finding her own space and doing something different, and I think she's really successful at communicating the fear that these people are living with. These people have fled civil war, ethnic cleansing. They were scared that they would be disappeared or murdered, and Chandran really demonstrates how the threat of deportation, which is a death sentence, hangs over these people. Are these detention centres essentially jails with very, very poor facilities? Yes. Is that cruel? Yes. Are the guards horrible people who prey upon asylum seekers? Absolutely. Chandran definitely doesn't ignore that aspect, by the way. But as an onlooker on Australia's cruel asylum seekers practice, I can see the injustice, the unfairness, the political manipulation, the racism behind everything. And I intellectually understood that these people were fleeing murder, but the threat hanging over their heads for over a decade in some cases of being sent home to be murdered, the trauma that invokes, how dare our government not do better? Under our current progressive government, average detention time has increased by 70 days. A bill is being proposed forcing asylum seekers to apply for passports from their country of origin. That, by the way, is terrifying. Families are being broken up, so it's great that we're giving some of them temporary protection visas, but come on. We're still in violation of human rights laws. During the last election, my local member door-knocked me, and I confronted her on this issue. She confessed that they were too scared of Rupert Murdoch's media army to do anything. And to all the Australians watching this is a fool's choice for Prime Minister, but this is even worse. And I'd like to remind you all, we don't have a two-party system. We need to stop putting the two major parties first, because a Labour government scared of Rupert Murdoch is a puppet government and simply cannot be voted for. And Dutton is a racist psychopath. He was the minister in charge of Manus Island and oversaw the torture of people during the Morrison government. He can never be allowed to become our Prime Minister. When governments don't empathise with people as human beings, they won't empathise with you if it suits them. We have to vote for alternate candidates. If Labour wins the next election, forcing them into a minority government with the Greens, with progressive independents such as Andrew Wilkie, or even with the Teals, will improve the situation here. All three of those groups have much better policies on asylum seekers. and will send Labour a message that they need to do better. They need to stop being scared of an old cranky man. And we need to reject the narrative that majority governments are stronger and better. There are many minority governments around the world, and in many cases, this mixing of ideals improves things. Back to the novel. Along with the horrors of detention centres, Chandran is also able to show the bureaucracy of pretension that these semi-military organisations have. The mentality of we protect our own. Lucky our protagonist and investigator is consequently prevented from being able to do her job, asked to leave and then threatened. The same toe-the-line mentality is observed among the guards, and when you consider that Lucy is there to investigate the death of one of them, we don't know if he was murdered or if he committed suicide, you would think the guards would want that looked into. She is really exploring the de-individualization and the culture of fear that exists in some of these pseudo-military organizations. Combining a thrilling plot with political issues, and rather than focusing on characters representing general asylum seekers, she has focused on individual stories from a small collection of characters, which produces a much more intimate and emotional read. Chandran must not just be a contender, but a favourite to win her second Miles Franklin Prize next year. By the way, I've just found out that she has a new novel coming out in January 2025, Unfinished Business. It's a thriller. Sri Lanka, 2009. Decades of civil war and bloodshed are being brought to an end at last, by any means necessary. In the capital, Colombo, tenacious journalist Amin Fernando is murdered, execution style, on a busy street near her home with no witnesses. With pressure growing to find Amina's killer, CIA agent Ali Harper is sent to seek justice for the journalist's death, with strict instructions. Find something, but not too much. It's her first time returning to the island after her last mission went tragically awry 4 years ago, and Allah has one more ghost to try and lay to rest. Amid the international scheming and jostling for stakes in a post-war Sri Lanka, Ali follows the trail of secrets on a mission to uncover a truth worth killing for. The Fertile Earth by Ruthvika Rao. A sweeping saga about class divide in India, politics, rebellion, and trying to forge your own path and be with a person you love despite everything. A novel about love and also about hate. I'm going to be blunt here. Rao has written an excellent book that announces her as a new literary force. However, this book frustrates me because it could have been a truly great book that is remembered years and years from now. One that brands itself upon the literary canon, but it just falls a little bit short of that. For a while I was comparing this to Rohinton Mystery's epic novel A Fine Balance, which is no small comparison for me. That is one of the 3 best books I've ever read. But Rao has just played it a little bit too safe. At 384 pages, it is slightly longer than the average book, but I would have loved Rao to have been allowed 100 more pages to go into a bit more of the history and to flesh things out perfectly. Please don't misunderstand the criticism. This is one of the best novels that you will read this year. But what I am saying is Ruthvika Rao has a scary amount of talent and should be disappointed by the "this year" caveat in the last statement. I cannot wait for their next book and to see what she does next. 2 brothers and 2 sisters are friends in a village haunted by a man-eating tiger. The 4 children want the glory of hunting the tiger. And please, if you're a child watching this and you take nothing else from this book review, please remember that if you want to hunt a man-eating tiger, ask an adult to join you. Things don't end well, and this creates a divide between 2 families, a divide that was already there by virtue of them being from different socio-economic stratas of indentured servitude. Despite all the unpleasantness, one of the brothers, Krishna, and one of the sisters, Vijaya, kind of have a bit of a thing for each other, something the families are not too keen on. Krishna is given a scholarship to go and study in Hyderabad, far away from everybody, and never see Vijaya again. His brother Ranga, who is essentially blamed for the tiger incident, remains an indentured slave and harbours a rather large chip on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Vijaya goes off to Mumbai to study. You can see there are a lot of themes here to jump into. There is so much injustice and chance or luck in this book, depending on who the character is. And I cannot help but to wonder, is that a political critique? Hard work doesn't always get you ahead. Add in this wonderful atmospheric writing, a gasp-worthy climax, emotional roller coasters. There is so much politics and history on the page here, and it has these really well crafted characters. This is the sort of novel that could well win the Women's Prize next year, and it is very much in that vein, that accessible, well balanced, intelligent, enjoyable type of read that prize likes to advocate for. And I really do think that there's something in this book for almost any reader. I even struggle to see the people who don't usually agree with me dislike this book, but the people who have similar tastes to me, just pick this book up. I guarantee you'll like it. This will be one of the best books I read this year for so many different reasons, but yet I just wish she had have taken that little bit more time and have been granted a few more pages. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye bye.